Good evening. Welcome to our Bhagavad Gita discussion. Thank you so much for being with me this evening. We'll begin this evening's discussion on chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita. First with the invocation mantras that I normally chant. You can meditate on these mantras because mantras are very powerful force, very powerful sound vibration. Or if you have, because these mantras, the first two are about the principle of teacher and how important it is on our spiritual path. Om Jnana Timarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah. That our teacher illuminates our path with the torchlight of knowledge. So if you have such a person in your life that is illuminating your journey, your path, then you can meditate. Even if you don't know these mantras, you can meditate on the sound, because the first two are glorifying that principle. The second two are mantras to my teacher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, then to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is the deliverer of a good fortune, a great fortune for humanity, giving us the opportunity to involve ourselves in kirtan, publicly, privately. Over 500 years ago, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came and gave us that blessing, that boon. And along with that, the kirtan comes the torchlight of knowledge also, as stated in his eight mantras, Shikshashtakam. And then the last one is the Hare Krishna mantra, which creates all auspiciousness. So, let us begin with the invocation mantras this wonderful evening. Timarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Didati Svapodantikam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastitya Deshatarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone. So happy you can join me. Hi, Eleonora. Sid, welcome. After your operation, I hope all is going well for you in terms of the healing process.
Yes, Laksmi, I'm doing well. It's just hard to stand up when I've been sitting. Other than that, I'm fine.
Okay, so rest as you need. I
I
know
will.
that was my experience with the knee operation. It was just time, rest, and lots of massage, self massage. I still do it today because it really helps with the blood flow. So take care of yourself.
I am. Thank you.
And thank you for your attendance this evening. So we'll begin where we left off on chapter 7. And for those of you that are joining for the first time, no worries in terms of what chapter we're on, because it's an ongoing discussion, and a lot of the topics that have been discussed will be continued to be discussed, because actually where the first couple of chapters, Krishna is building the foundation for our understanding of Bhagavad Gita. So quite often I refer back to verses that we already spoke about in the second chapter, because they're so fundamental, they're so foundational that they warrant, reference to again, and it also supports maybe a new point that's being made. So if you are here for the first time, welcome, and for those of you who are continue joining our discussions, thank you. Chapter 7. Prabhupada entitles it Knowledge of the Absolute. And we're going to discuss a little bit this evening, because of where the verses are going, a little bit about the demigods. Because I think this topic is oftentimes, especially in my experience in the yoga community, not really understood. I mean, there are a lot of kirtans that take place in the yoga community, and that's laudable. That's wonderful. But oftentimes the mantras and the personalities that are being glorified in those mantras, they're not really understood as to their real position or who they are at all. And according to the Gita and other Vedic texts, these are not mythical personalities, mythological personalities, but these are personalities that do exist, albeit maybe not within our view, because our view is limited by our level of consciousness. And that'll be another topic within the context of demigods. How is it that we don't see demigods, that we don't see Krishna, that we don't see the spiritual world, we don't see any of these, that we don't see the soul? How is it possible that we do not have the ability to see these things? And it's a very simple analogy that I often use is, there are things within our world, within our relative world, that we accept without seeing. Like, how many of us see atoms? But yet, how many of you doubt the existence of atomic structure? We don't see it. We hear about it from authorities, scientists, and we accept that existence, whether we see it or not, based on these authorities. So similarly, the topics that are contained in Bhagavad Gita, the topic of demigods, for instance, or the topic of Supreme Personality of Godhead, Brahman, all the other, Paramatma, Jiva, all of these different topics that are discussed in the Bhagavad Gita exist. They're not mythological. But our perception is scanty. We have a very, our ability to perceive things beyond sense, gross material objects comprised of the 5 gross elements that Krishna talks about in the beginning of the 7th chapter: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. What we see around us in terms of shapes and forms, etc., are really a combination of these elements, and when they're combined in earth, and they produce vegetation, which is coming from the earth, or rain, which is water, all of these things that are there, we're able to see. That is because we are equipped to see them with the given senses, and this is very important, the level of consciousness that we are on at present. Because it is really consciousness, conscious awareness, and how it's been cultivated, and how it's being influenced or not, or free from influence, which affects our perception. So let us read a few of the verses in the 7th chapter, which will prompt discussion on the demigods. And again, I always encourage you to, if there's something pressing, you have a question, please. I would love to entertain any questions. It would help others also, because they may be, what you may have a question about may be on other people's minds who are not brave enough to raise your hand and ask the question. So we are, let's begin with 19, text 19. I think this is a repeat of this verse, but it's an important verse. So after many, many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. So, a couple of things right in this verse. After many births and deaths. So Krishna here, in his way, is indicating that the soul is eternal, and the soul has a sojourn. It's on a journey. And that's why until the soul completes its journey by having full realization of the absolute truth, it will continue to take many births and experience many deaths. Because according to Bhagavad Gita, as birth is certain, so is death. As death is certain, so is rebirth, except for those who have attained pure, unadulterated consciousness of the absolute truth, the absolute reality. So right there, Krishna is bringing up this point of reincarnation. We take birth, we go through all the stages of life, then the stages of deterioration, and ultimately death, to begin again, reborn, rebirth. And then what does he say? The conclusion, what is the conclusive step in that process of birth and death and rebirth? The conclusive step is actually having full knowledge of one's relationship with the absolute truth, the absolute reality. And Krishna here, he defines absolute truth or absolute reality in 3 different categories in the Bhagavad Gita that we've discussed. God, the person; God, the energy, Brahman, the underlying energy that motivates all living entities; and God that exists within the heart of all living entities, not just human beings. When we talk about that category of absolute reality, it's not that there is super soul, rough English translation for Paramatma. Atma means the self, and Param means the super self or the super soul. So it's not, so another nice point in this verse, it's not just birth old age, disease, death, rebirth. And it's not that the soul is in the body, but the soul is accompanied by divinity, by God in the form of Paramatma. So this is another nice distinguishing point about this verse, that divinity is within the heart of all living entities. And that, scientists may call it instinct. When we talk about animals and birds and fish and all that, they act instinctually, according to Gita. All knowledge, all remembrance, all forgetfulness comes from this distinct category of divinity called Paramatma. So that's another. So the conclusive step is to understand that ultimate reality exists, that absolute reality exists, and we surrender to it and align ourselves with it. And that is yoga. To understand the definition of yoga in complete and total, it means that we connect ourselves again. Yoga means to link or to connect, union. But union or connection with what? And according to Gita, it's with the absolute realm or the absolute reality, the absolute truth, which is embodied in the Bhagavan feature or the personality of God, the Brahman feature, the energy, or the Paramatma feature. That is our avenues of approach to connection with the absolute truth. So, knowing me to be the cause of all cause and all that is, Krishna is making that definitive declaration. And a person who does that, who understands, who is linked, that yukta, the yukta means that yogi who is linked, who has made the connection and is living according to the connection, that soul, Krishna is saying here, is very rare. That's a rare soul. So number 20, those whose intelligence has been stolen by material desires surrender unto demigods and follow the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. So here we get the introduction to this category of demigods. What is a demigod? What does it mean? Now, if you've studied Greek mythology, you know that there is Zeus and Athena, and all the different personalities that inhabit Mount Olympus, and of course that has been termed mythology. But when we use the comparative measure of the Vedic literatures, the Vedas also talk about demigods. And according to the Vedas, these are not mythological beings, but these are actually beings that exist. There are 8,400,000 species of life. 8,400,000 species of life. And sometimes I would question that in my mind, 8,400,000 species of life. But someone, I can't remember who read an article, told me about an article in a science journal, which the new accepted theory is that there is over 8 million species of life. Scientists are accepting that fact, that there are over 8 million species of life. So we can see, not that the Vedas need confirmation by empirical senses, but this is something that now is being accepted. So 8,400,000 species of life. By perception, we can see and experience many of those, in terms of birds, the various species of birds, the various species of fish, aquatics, and the various species of trees. We can get some inclination of all of these different species of life. 8,400,000. So when you break that all down, there is a breakdown. I don't have the figures at my disposal, but there are 400,000 species of human being alone. Now, that's probably the hardest to wrap one's mind around, that there's 400,000 species of humans. So what constitutes a species then? You know, when we look at a bird, or we have raptors and grain-eating birds and nectar-drinking birds, and we have all these varieties that we can see. 400,000 species of human beings. I once asked that question, and the answer I received was species is, when we talk about 400,000 species of human being, species is indicated by level of consciousness. So when you have the permutations of the modes of material nature, passion, sattva gun, rajagun, tamagun, and all the various combinations, we can see that one's level of consciousness is by how it is influenced by the modes of material nature. The reason I brought this particular topic up is because the topmost species of humanity, human life, is considered to be the demigods. So they are not like you or me in the sense that they live much, much longer. They have a much greater duration of life. In many instances, they don't even experience old age, but they are temporary. It's not like they are eternal. They do have a shelf life, so to speak, although it may be, like in the case of Brahma, millions of years. The way to understand that is according to the species of body you have a particular level of consciousness and a particular duration of time according to that particular body that you are inhabiting. For instance, a fruit fly may live 72 hours. A human being on the average may live 75 to 80 years. But within the form that the living entity is in, the consciousness experiences that time period as a full lifespan. In other words, we experience our 75, 80, 90, 100 years as a full lifespan. A fruit fly, 72 hours, it's a full lifespan. A dog, on the average, a large dog will live to be about 10 years, 10 to 12 years. That's a full lifespan. So when the living entity is embodied by a certain species, the perception is greatly influenced by the mechanism it is perceiving from, and the consciousness which accompanies that mechanism, and the predominant mode of material nature that a particular species is in. For instance, it's described that the cow is influenced by sattva gun. It's predominantly a sattvic animal because, a cow is very peaceful, a cow is very generous and giving. A cow produces its milk not only for its young, but for humanity. So a tiger may be in the mode of passion, and then you'll have other species that are in the mode of ignorance. So you see, when the living entity is in a particular form, that particular form has a predominant mode of material nature, and the combined influence of the body, the mechanism that you're in, and the mode of material nature which predominates, there's a certain degree of perception. So that is how lifespan is perceived as full lifespan, not, in context to a human lifespan. Oh, that poor fruit fly only lived to be 72. Oh, my dog only lived to be 10 or 12 years old. For them, it's a full lifespan. So the perception is greatly influenced by A, the body we're in, and B, the modes of material nature. So when we talk about 400,000 species of humanity, we talk about the various permutations or combinations of the modes of material nature. And we see that there are different cultures where the lifespan is not that great, even within humanity, maybe in the 40s or 50s. On the other hand, in other cultures, average lifespan can be in the 90s and the hundreds. So even with the context of humanity as we know it, there is greater and lesser degrees of lifespan. But there are also greater and lesser degrees of consciousness. And this is not meant to be demeaning. This is not demeaning any particular level of consciousness. It's the way the Vedas categorize the different classes of human form of life. So the demigods are at the top of the heap in that regard, where they have long lifespan, a great degree of knowledge. In many cases, they are endowed with mystic powers, and like Patanjali discusses mystic powers in the third pada of the Yoga Sutras. He talks about there's 8 primary mystic powers and 10 minor or secondary mystic powers. Anima Siddhi, Mahima Siddhi, Lagima Siddhi, Prapti Siddhi, Prakamya Siddhi, Kamavayashita Siddhi, Ishita Siddhi. All of these different siddhis or powers are there, which gives that particular person an ability to do things which are beyond what we would say normal activities. We see in the life of Jesus, for instance, it's recorded that he walked on water. It's recorded in the Bible that he changed water to wine. It's recorded in the Bible that he cured people with very serious illnesses or brought people back from the dead. All this is explained as being, for a highly elevated being, mystic powers, the ability to manipulate the material energy in a particular way. So the demigods, and there are many, many, many different stories in the Puranas about the various demigods that are there. But we should understand that the demigods are agents. They are agents of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Like many people think Hinduism is polytheism because of mentioning of, Brahma and Shiva and Agni and Indra and Chandra and Surya and Vayu and all these different personalities who all possess to greater or lesser degrees great powers. But according to the Vedic literatures, they are considered demigods, or they are on a lower level than Bhagavan. Bhagavan is a term, when it's used in this particular way, it could be used in terms of a great soul, a great personality, but when we talk about the 3 categories of divinity, Bhagavan is used as the possessor of 6 qualities in perfection and in completion. And there is only one personality that has that feature. And to explain it even further, there are many different demigods and there are many different avatars. And there's a distinction between that too. The demigods still, they are not on the level of Vishnu Tattva. I mean, they can be. There is a category of demigods that they are incarnations of the Supreme. There's also a category of demigods that are just highly evolved living entities. So there's really 2 categories of living entities or demigods that exist. One is highly evolved living entities. The other one is incarnations, partial incarnations of the Lord. And in order to give you a clear understanding of when I say incarnation, in the Brahma Samhita, it uses a nice analogy. We have a candle, right? You have one candle. It's the original candle. It's lit. And it's manifesting its full potency in its light and heat. You take another candle, you light the second candle. That second candle has the potency of light and heat that has come from the first candle. And you can do 1,000 candles in that way. So avatars that are coming from the supremely divine personality of Godhead, known by different names according to different cultures, according to different levels of understanding and realization. They are part of or emanations of that one personality. So to address that point, being polytheistic, not in the sense that there are many gods that are equal, but in the sense that there's one God that can expand in many, many different ways. When we get to the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna will reveal his universal form, and there he will demonstrate how from him manifests the various demigods for the function of management of this material world. So not all demigods have positions like that, but many demigods are in a functional position. In other words, they are administrators. Just like the President of the United States has a cabinet. He has the Secretary of Interior, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Transportation. He has all of these different personalities. I think there's 13 cabinet members for a president who assists him in governing the United States government. I'm talking about the United States government here. And they assist and they take on a particular aspect, a particular division of management of the country, the United States. So in terms of within the universe and within many universes, there are these agents called demigods that help to manage the various things that go on here. Manage the sun, for instance, is managed by Surya, the sun god. And what a big function the sun has, because the heat, the light, the energy which emanates from the sun is the source of life. There are very few living entities that can live without sunlight. There may be some in the deepest depths of the ocean that can function, but I'm sure there's some little bit of light. But sun is such an important personality and orb in the universe that it gives off this energy. So in order to manage that division, just like we have the power company, I think it's in Florida here, it's the Florida Power and Electric Company, like that. And all the electric that is distributed and disseminated through all the homes, through all the wires that are located, you see the wires there. I have this light on right now. I have my computer on right now because I'm getting electricity into my house. So that's done by an agency. And within that agency, there is someone in charge of that agency. So the universe is that. So these personalities are very powerful. To be in control of the heat and light of the sun or the wind, like Vayu, Varuna, the water, the oceans and the lakes and the rivers. All of these very powerful forces that are here. requires a highly qualified individual, to say the least. So these demigods, therefore, are very powerful beings, and they are also endowed with the ability to fulfill material desires. That's why you have, different types of pujas, worships, types of worship where demigods are worshipped in different ways because people are seeking boons. I remember once I went with a friend of mine, Swami Adikeshava Swami at the time. I was just a brahmachari, and we went to see this big guru from India, very famous guru. He was Indira Gandhi. This is many years ago, I guess in the 70s, I believe late 70s. He was Indira Gandhi's guru. His name was Chandra Swami, and he was reported to have some mystic powers, and he was very popular. And we were there, and we were having discussion, and he was recognizing Srila Prabhupada as a very great saint, a very great saintly personality. And then while we were talking, and a couple came in, an Indian couple came in, husband and wife, and they spoke in Hindi, so we really didn't understand. And they went back and forth for a little bit, maybe 10 minutes. And then after they left, Chandra Swami looked at us and he said, "So they came to me for blessings." He said, "But they don't realize the real blessings come from you two, because you all are giving the blessing of Krishna. And the blessing of Krishna can free oneself from birth, death, old age, and disease." So he said, they don't understand. They're coming to me for a blessing. Give me a good house. May my son or daughter get into college. May I get a new car. May I get a promotion, etc. All these blessings they're asking from me. But the real blessing is to get the blessings of the devotee who is engaged in pure devotional service. So he had that understanding, not that we were anywhere near that, but at least the understanding is correct. So with the demigods, people worship the demigods and do different demigod puja or worship so that they can get different kinds of blessings. So the demigods are often sought after, and because their blessings are sought after. And the karmakandic section of the Vedas, where you perform actions in order to get reward. So in this regard, you can worship Katyayani, a form of Durga, to get a good husband, and so forth and so on. You can worship various demigods. Surya is the bestower of health. So all of these different demigods have particular powers, and people approach them. What does Krishna say here in the Bhagavad Gita? He said, those whose intelligence has been stolen by material desires surrender unto the demigods. So it's indicative when one is using the valuable asset of the human form of life and using that asset to worship demigods for temporary benefit. That means the intelligence has been stolen by material desires, and thus one is living the illusion rather than the reality. So surrender unto demigods and follow the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own nature. So that means according to their prescribed methods of approaching demigods, these various demigods. We have someone there with their microphone on. Thank you. Then there are different ways, different objects are used in worship. Like for Durga, you use a red flower. For Shiva, you bathe the Shiva lingam. And all these different things that are there, rules and regulations. 21. I am in everyone's heart as the Supersoul. So Krishna reiterates this point. As soon as one desires to worship some demigod, because they have been influenced by their material desires, I make his faith steady so that he can devote himself to that particular deity. Now, this is important because steady faith and the following of rules and regulations is a strategy for every yogic path. It doesn't matter, what you're seeking. If you're seeking material desires, that's the strategy. But if you're seeking ultimate liberation, mukti, or prema, that's also the strategy. One has to have faith and follow the rules and regulations that are prescribed so that one can advance and purify. See, when worship of the demigods is for some material acquisition. But when you worship the Supreme through devotional service, the worship itself is meant for purification of heart initially. So when the heart becomes purified, then the material desires naturally diminish and eventually go away. So that's the beauty of bhakti. Bhakti is not the emphasis is not on renunciation. The emphasis is on attachment, and from attachment comes renunciation. And the attachment is to service of the Supreme. That's where we become attached. That's our attachment. That's our focus. And as a result of that attachment, Krishna says, param drishtva nivartate, which means the result of the attachment to selfless devotional service unto the Supreme, the result of that is detachment. You don't have to do it separately. Just cultivating attachment to devotional service, attachment to service of the Supreme without any motivation, that naturally causes a sense of fulfillment, a sense of happiness within the core of one's heart, and everything else becomes secondary. I told you last week, I believe, the story of Dhruva. That was the story of Dhruva. Through his penances and austerities, his performance of yoga, just to obtain a kingdom greater than his father's, he ultimately, part of his penances and austerities was to chant the sacred mantra Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, and just by his penances and his austerities and hearing that sacred mantra, he had darshan. So it was a process, it was a yogic process that he followed, but ultimately what happened, he had achieved the darshan of the Supreme, and once he had that connection, once that yoga was established between him and the Supreme, he then felt so fulfilled that he realized that his initial motivation for the execution of yoga was by comparison, it was like seeking glass gems instead of the real jewel. So Dhruva was able to do that. And there's a lot of stories which indicate the same factor. Even personalities that are very sinful, like in the story of Jagai and Madai in Chaitanya Lila. They were so sinful. They committed every sin that you can imagine. They were so sinful. And they enjoyed themselves by doing what they did. But when they finally had the opportunity to have darshan with Nityananda and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, none other than Balaram and Krishna themselves, they realized, they began to understand that their lifestyle of sin And whatever they were getting, that was really just foolishness, just total illusion. And they changed. They had a change of heart by the mercy, by the blessing of Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya. They had a change of heart. So every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. We should remember that, because a saint like Mrigari the hunter, he became a saintly personality, but prior to his connection with Narad Muni, what was he? He was a hunter that only half killed animals. But by following the instructions of Narad Muni, having certain realizations by the grace of Narad Muni, he was able to realize that his life, the life that he was leading, was a wasteland. And that's what happens when we apply our energy differently, with a different motivation. And also, what's the result of that? As in worshiping demigods, you may get your boon, your blessing. You may get the wife that you want, or the husband that you want, or the education that you want, or the money that you want, or the job that you want, etc. But that'll all disappear. That'll all turn to ash, just like the body. Dust, ashes, or the defecation of worms that eat the body when it's buried. That's the future of the body. But the future of one who gives one's heart to the Supreme in devotion, it's eternal. And the end result, the concluding, as Krishna said there, such a great soul is very rare, because they experience pure love for the Supreme. So although it seems attractive from one perspective to worship a demigod and get this particular blessing or benediction, in reality there's two types of actions. There's shreyas and prayas. Prayas means immediate benefit, and shreyas, I believe, sometimes I get them backwards. Shreyas and prayas. One I think shreyas means long-term benefit, and prayas means short-term benefit. So what are we doing in life? We're expending the same energy, are we not? Let's look at the categories of how you can expend your energy. You can expend your energy in trying to fulfill every desire that comes to mind, every desire that you think is pleasing, or to run away from things which are displeasing. That's what happens in the world. We either desire things that we are that seem to be pleasing for us, and we try to evade those things which are not pleasing to us. And we expend all of our energy doing that. And how do we do that? Well, the normal perception is, if I work hard, I make money, and I can buy the things that I want to buy. So there's a lot of energy that's expended in that regard. But the one thing that's guaranteed is we'll grow old, and we won't be able to do that anymore. That's called retirement. When one retires, you really don't want to, you don't have the drive anymore to do that, or you don't have the ability anymore, either mentally or physically, to do that, or or there are some people that continue because they know nothing else. We lived in Puerto Rico. Right across, our neighbor was Dr. Morales. Dr. Morales, I think he passed away at 99, either 99 or 100. He was right around there. But he was a psychiatrist, and he was teaching in med school pretty much up to, his passing. That's what he did. That was his life. So my point being that we have to perform austerities and penances in any life. So if we have no awareness of demigods and approaching them for higher boons, We just are of the mindset that I work and I'll get what I need, and I'll work even harder if I want to get more and more fame, more adoration, more distinction, more money, more prestige, etc. It all requires energy, an output of energy. It all requires that. But what is being given to us in the Bhagavad Gita, that if you take the same output of energy and you connect it to the consciousness, the conscious awareness of the fact that this is not mine. Bhoktaram jagnatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suridam sarvabhutam. So that means three things. Bhoktaram jagnatapasam. We have to perform sacrifice. A person who wants to get a PhD so they get a better job in their particular field, they perform a lot of sacrifice. A person who wants to get a medical degree so they can be a doctor, hopefully, to help people, but, there is that perk of making a lot of money. But they work really hard. I experienced it with watching my wife when she was in residency. Absolutely insane how hard those people work. 12, 14, 15 hours a day, barely getting enough to eat and enough sleep. So there's a lot of sacrifice that's performed. So Krishna says, you just connect. You see me as the focal point of your sacrifice. I'm doing this as a sacrifice, as an offering to you. Bhoktaram jagnatapasam. And not just an offering to my senses or to my well-being or my family, which are really extensions of myself. But you see that, what you're doing and the energy, the output that you are doing, you see it in relationship to connecting as a strategy to connect to the Supreme. And that becomes purifying. And therefore, the perception becomes purified. And then all of these things that we read about and find hard to believe, the demigods, the spiritual world, other planetary systems, mystic powers, when you read the Mahabharata, it's hard to wrap your mind around the fact that someone can shoot an arrow, chant a mantra, and that arrow will turn into snakes. Or that arrow will turn into thousands of arrows. Or that arrow will become a mini atomic bomb. It's really hard to wrap your mind around that. But once a person, through the process of yoga, and in particular bhakti yoga, practices the rules and the regulations with all sincerity, there is a purification and education, meditation that takes place, and our eyes become endowed with the ability to see things beyond the norm, to see things in their proper light. Sattva gun, one of the characteristics of sattva gun is clarity of perspective. So another characteristic of sattva gun is the development or the cultivation of this perception, which helps us to see subtlety, not just gross, but also subtlety, the subtle things that exist. Tanmatras, that every element has earth, it has subtleties to the earth element. There's subtleties to the air element and fire element. There are different subtleties that are there. So these are important things to note. Number 22, endowed with such a faith, he endeavors to worship a particular demigod and thus obtains his desires. But in actuality, These benefits are bestowed by me alone. So Krishna is saying, okay, you're approaching, Shiva for a nice wife, or Durga, for some material benediction. But their ability to give you what you are seeking, that comes from me, Krishna is saying. Because later on in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is addressed as Deva Jagatpate, that he is the source of all demigods and all demigod powers. 23, men of small intelligence worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. So he's reiterating this point. Those who worship the demigods go to the planets of the demigods, but my devotees ultimately reach my supreme abode, my supreme planet, which is eternity. It's Satchidananda. Everything in relationship to the Supreme has the characteristics of Satchit Ananda, eternity, knowledge, and bliss. So Krishna's abode, Krishna's paraphernalia, everything, it has that characteristic. Eternity. It is eternal in its essential nature. 24. Unintelligent men who do not know me perfectly. Now, how many times does Krishna repeat that? Unintelligent, not intelligent, etc. And what he's meaning here is that you are, as I mentioned, you are misappropriating your resources. And therefore, you're not obtaining your full potentiality. You're not experiencing your full potentiality. Just by getting blessings, material blessings, is not fulfillment of your potentiality, your complete potentiality. Love, pure love, is the realization of Satchit Ananda, eternity, knowledge, and bliss is. These are manifestations of your full potentiality. So, unintelligent men who do not know me perfectly think that I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, was impersonal before and have now assumed this personality. Due to their small knowledge, they do not know my higher nature, which is imperishable and supreme. And here Krishna is directly challenging Shankaracharya's perspective of the Gita and the Upanishads, where he's saying that eternal reality has no form. It is devoid of form, devoid of personality. So he's directly challenging that Mayavad, or that impersonal philosophy, in this, that no, that is due to a lack of sufficient knowledge about the nature of the absolute reality. That is why you may think that any form, every form, whether it be Krishna's form, Vishnu's form, Ram's form, any form is illusion. Krishna says, my form, and like he said in the 4th chapter, right? You remember we read in the 4th chapter where Krishna says that my body is ajo pisan of yatma. It's unborn. Although my body is unborn and never deteriorates. Krishna says that right in the 4th chapter. Then and so Krishna is saying here, you can't understand that because your perception is covered by tamagun and rajagun, or passion and ignorance, and therefore you see through that filter. And when there's ignorance there, it's not only that it's not only that you see through a filter, it's that you can't see at all. Some of these things you cannot see or perceive at all. They're just way beyond the ability of a conditioned entity's perception. 25, I think I'll stop here. Read this one, it's 8 o'clock. I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them, I am covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know I am unborn and infallible. So Krishna reiterates this point, that just by your senses and your mind and your mundane intellect, you cannot understand, you cannot cultivate the pristine perception. The perception will be covered by Rajagun and Tamagun, by ignorance and passion, and therefore you will not be able to see things as they are. That is what Krishna says. I am never manifest. So that indicates that it's not by your endeavor only that you can see, you can be endowed with this perception. But there is an indication in this verse and in other verses where Krishna says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam. You worship me, you engage in devotional service to me, I give it to you. I manifest to you within your heart. Bhaktyaham abhijanati yavanas chashmi tattvataha. So abhijanati is the opposite of what's said here. This is nabhijanati, that I am not manifest. I won't manifest. And I use this analogy because I think it's appropriate, that you can manifest yourself as you like, according to who you're dealing with and what vibe you're getting from that person. You know, if you really get a very good vibe, trusting, respectful, etc., then you may open up to that person. But if you don't, you don't trust the person, you're not sure of their motivations, etc., then you don't reveal yourself. So if you have the ability to reveal who you really are, it stands to reason, so does the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he says it here, I won't manifest if you behave in this way. I will manifest if you engage in selfless devotional service. So I'll stop here on text 25 and open it up to any comments, observations, realizations, questions, etc., etc. Anyone?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, this is Shaktiman Das.
Hey Shaktiman, how are you?
I'm good, Prabhu. Thank you. Yeah, just one comment. Like, I was listening to Srila Prabhupada's lecture, and in that he mentions how this 8,004,000 number comes from the three modes. He says there is three modes of material nature, and there is 3 into 3, 9, the combinations. And then he said 9 into 9, which is 81. So he said almost 8 million, like closer to 8,004,000.
Yeah, he gives that nice mathematical formula about the 8 million for 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 9, 81, plus 3, 84, 8,400,000 species. Yeah, gives that. That's
So you have that, Prabhu? Like, do you have that somewhere? Like,
do I have that at my fingertips?
Yeah.
I don't, but I've read it. And I've also heard it in Prabhupada's lectures.
Right. Is there any reference to that, Prabhu? Like, where we can go and see?
Well, we can look it up. We can make that a project. Where to find that?
Okay. Yeah. It's so amazing, like how we came up with that. I mean, even in modern science, you don't know how to. They're still counting, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you see that it's indication of how many ways these modes can mix in varying degrees and proportions that can give a subsequent species. That's how the species are described, how they manifest, because of the innumerable ways that these modes can intermingle. So it's quite brilliant, actually.
Yeah, I was so amazed listening to that. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the question. Anyone else? Any realizations or comments? I gave quite a mouthful regarding the demigods, so I hope it was clear and easy to understand. Okay, well, thank you so. Yeah.
Sorry. It is not really about the demigods, but about the
It's okay.
liberation that Patanjali proposes.
Mm-hmm.
Is like a lesser stage.
Kaivalya.
Right.
Yeah, Kaivalya. It's not a complete stage. It's a realization of the self. He emphasizes the nature of the self. That's where happiness lies. So the the other real levels of realization, culminating in bhakti, give a understanding of all the different levels that can be achieved. Whether it's the nature of the self, self-realization, whether it's the realization of Brahman and of the unity, the unifying principle, the imperishability, immortality, and underlying happiness that is contained in Brahman, or to Bhagavan, which is, according to Gita, is the source of both Brahman and the Jiva. So yeah, and to that, if we want to put it, it's a lesser degree of realization. The analogy that can be used is if you light one candle in a dark room, how much can you see? But if you go outside and stand in the sunlight, then you can see everything. So Patanjali's turning, he's lighting a candle. One thing that's about Patanjali is he definitely very strongly says there's Prakriti and Purush. There's material energy and spiritual energy. Yeah. No other question or comment? Well, thank you very much for your kind attention. It's always lovely to see you. Yeah, Gayatri?
So I wanted just to ask you, how do you reconcile for yourself the fact that this Bhagavad Gita is not really a direct translation, but more an interpretation? Like, for example, every time I see a verse, like, for example, text 21 starts with, I am in everyone's heart as the super soul, where in the original, there is nothing like heart, there is no word super soul. I mean, this sentence is nowhere there. Like, I always feel that this interpretation, it gives me more of a doubt rather than gratefulness for, putting all these things into the translation. Like, I can understand when Prabhupada can write everything that he wants in the purport, but when it is part of the translation, when I see him adding things to the translation, even if it makes sense, but I cannot completely trust all the words because I feel that, it's more interpreting rather than translating.
Well, within our lineage, there are various lineages, 4 Vaishnav lineages, and then the Advaitin lineage, etc. All are, if they're qualified, they are allotted the interpretation. For instance, in Patanjali, in the Yoga Sutras, it's not recommended that you read just the Yoga Sutras, but you also read the commentators. So the nature of the Vedic literatures is as such, it's very difficult to understand, and therefore we have to find the commentator, but the commentator has to meet a certain criteria. Now, in terms of Prabhupada's translations, what you're saying, the literal translation, and then there's contextual translation. So here's Hridayananda. Which verse were you referring to?
Like in this case, it is verse 21, but
21.
It's many verses. It's like you read every chapter, there are many verses that
Okay, so Hridayananda Das Goswami who has his Gita, and he gives a literal translation, because literal translation, the English is very rough. So his translation of 21, that's the one you're referring to, right? Right, Gayatri?
Yes, yes.
He says, with that faith, one undertakes worship and thereby attains wishes actually bestowed by me alone. Now, according to Hridayananda Goswami, who is a Sanskrit scholar, I think in the history of Harvard Divinity School, he's the only one that got 100% on his PhD test. So he's quite accepted as a good scholar. That's the way he translates it there. So Prabhupada comes in a lineage, a Vaishnav lineage, Krishna Bhakti lineage. And always, if you read Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's version, Baladev Vidyabhushan's version, and they're both considered scholars, particularly Baladev Vidyabhushan. You read Bhaktivinoda Thakur's version, you read Ramanujacharya's version, they all have put the Bhakti interpretation. Huh? The Bhava. Yeah. They've all commented on it as, this is Krishna. The way Prabhupada explains it, this is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, speaking about himself. I'll tell you a little story. One of my godbrothers, whose name is, oh God, I'm definitely getting old, Gaur Govinda Maharaj. He is originally from Orissa, and very bright disciple of Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada asked him to translate his literatures into Orissan, or Orion, I don't know which one's the correct. But, so he did. And he was a sannyasi, and he was very devout follower of Srila Prabhupada. And he was also the same kind of doubt that you're coming up with, Gayatri. He was having some doubt. So he studied in the university Sanskrit, and his mentor, the professor that he studied under, was a 50-year professor of Sanskrit, and well known, well accepted. So he gave him Prabhupada's books, and he asked him, he said, can you tell me what you think of these translations? And because, he was working on interpretation, he had to take the Sanskrit into Orion and read the English, and, so the professor agreed. Some time went by, he came back with Prabhupada's books. He put Prabhupada's books back on Gaur Govinda Maharaj's desk, and Gaur Govinda Maharaj said, well, and the scholar said, I have not read a more complete understanding of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam ever. He said, because, this is Krishna speaking about himself. And the Vaishnavas take the liberty to keep it within that context all throughout. Even though the Sanskrit may say something which appears to be different or sterile in that regard. So I don't know if that helps you at all, but ultimately it boils down to faith. And you either have faith in your intelligence, you have faith in the intelligence of somebody else, or you have faith,
Yeah.
you have faith in the
No, it's
your
15
devotee.
minutes overtime.
Okay.
That's what ultimately boils. You can't get away from that.
Oh, I see.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, folks, thanks a lot for your time. Great evening. I'm so happy to be here with you and to study together the words of Krishna and love your questions, whatever the questions may be. Until we meet again next week, you have a happy, healthy, and holy week. I'll see you
I
next week.
looked through the demigod we have now, which is Google, and it is Odia.
Oriya.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, folks. Have a great evening.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you so much.